We've set up a system for £500, we've talked about macro photography at Micro Four Thirds, we've talked about prime lenses under £250. Let's dive into wildlife photography. It's Throwback Thursday. Welcome back to Throwback Thursday, where we take a slightly closer look at the more interesting items in our ever-growing park cameras used department. This week, we're going to be looking at wildlife photography. Now, you can watch our Tutorial Tuesday episode all about wildlife photography. We've got one about bird photography as well, so we've got you nicely covered over on that side of things, on how to do it, on the kind of tips and tricks and stuff like that. But here at Throwback Thursday, we thought we'd take out some of the slightly more reasonably priced used lenses that we've got that we think would be great for wildlife photography. So generally with wildlife photography, you mostly going for kind of longer lenses to get in nice and close to the animals, whether it be birds or deer or any kind of wildlife really. You want to generally be going for those longer lenses. It allows you to stay further back and really zoom in. Zoom lenses are great because you've got a bit more versatility there over a prime lens, but they can be really quite expensive, especially if you go for a very bright aperture, like a large aperture lens. So we thought we'd try out some of these used lenses that we've got here that aren't maybe quite as fast in terms of aperture, but are still going to give you really great results for wildlife photography. So on the DSLR side, we've got the Canon 7D, which is an APS-C sensor, so it's giving you a 1.6 times crop. And then we've also got the Panasonic G80 as a camera body, so for the mirrorless side, and that is giving us a 2 times crop, which means that the lenses can be nice and small. Now, we talked a little bit last week about the advantages of using a Micro Four Thirds sensor like in this camera for macro, and a lot of those advantages carry over for wildlife as well. So we've got some really small lenses here. I mean, on this camera at the moment, I've got the 14 to 150 mil, so that's giving us a 2 times crop. So what's that, 28 to 300. And look at the size of it. It's tiny. It's super hand-holdable. I've also got another lens here, which is the 75 to 300. That's 150 to 600 with the crop. And look at the size of it. It's tiny. For full frame, you'd usually be looking at a lens that is on the line over whether you're going to need a tripod all the time to be using it, and this is tiny, so that's a massive advantage you get with the Micro Four Thirds. But similarly, even with the DSLR here, you know, it's an APS-C sensor, so I'm getting that extra reach. So I've got a 70 to 200 on here, but I'm getting the 1.6 times crop, so I'm getting really good reach there. And I've also got the 55 to 250, and again, that's extended as well. That's actually the AFS lens, so it's nice and cheap, that one. Now I'll pop links to everything down in the description so you can check out pricing and stuff like that. But that is a particularly decent lens for wildlife on a budget. Absolutely couldn't recommend something like that enough. So we've been out with both of the systems, both of the cameras and all 4 of the lenses, taking photographs of various kind of local wildlife. So nothing super exciting, but squirrels, ducks, swans, that kind of thing. Now, the first thing that stood out to me especially with the Micro Four Thirds system, is just how small, how compact it is. You know, it's perfect. Anyone looking to get into wildlife, anyone who's thought about doing it but they don't know where to start, it's such a great system to get into it because it's so hand-holdable. It's so easy to use out and about. It's such a joy to use, to be honest. Now, you've got image stabilization in the G80, so in the camera. So I never felt the need for a tripod, and even though those lenses are not the fastest lenses, you know, they're f4 to 5.6, f4.8 to 6.7, so they're not the fastest lenses, I never found that to be a problem. The camera's able to handle the higher ISO values, so I was able to bump that up a bit, and to be honest, if you're shooting in the right kind of conditions, it's just not that much of a problem. You know, you're going to want that slightly deeper depth of field anyway, so you're making sure to get the animal in focus. It really helped with that, you know, nailing focus. I find sometimes the faster lenses, if it's something like 600 mil and it's very, very fast, that can be problematic because just making sure you're nailing the focus and the depth of field can be a bit of an issue. Now, for someone who's just starting out, that extended depth of field that we talked about for the macro video as well, exactly the same applies here. With the Micro Four Thirds, you get that slightly extended depth of field because of the smaller sensor. It just makes it generally a bit easier to nail your photographs. Now with the Canon, obviously it's a slightly bigger, bulkier feel to the actual whole system, so the camera and the lens, but I quite liked that as well. You know, it's kind of more of a traditional wildlife feel, although with the 70 to 200 f4, that lens is it always surprises me how light that is. It's so light, and actually reasonably small, so it's much lighter than the 2.8 version, and it's only one stop, you know. So again, shooting the right conditions, you're gonna have a great time using that combination. Again, the 7D Mark II, absolutely able to handle slightly higher ISO values, so I never felt myself having any kind of issue with having those slightly narrower apertures, but that was never really a problem for me. Similarly, again, both of the Canon lenses had IS actually in the lens. That EFS lens in particular, they are very impressive. Now, they only work obviously on the Canon APS-C cameras, so the crop sensor cameras, but they're so impressive. IS in the lens, massive focal range, so it's very versatile, and that used comes in at £139. That's you know, that's a no-brainer. If you want to try out a bit of wildlife, that's just an absolute go-to, perfect place to start. Now, I think I've mentioned this a couple of times in the video, but it's worth just pointing out, one of the things to watch out for is not having such a fast aperture. You're going to want to make sure you are shooting in the right environments with this kind of setup. And that means not shooting like at dusk, you know, with the fast shutter speeds, or in a situation like today, for example. The reason I'm actually here in the studio rather than out and about for the rest of the video is because it's actually quite moody, it's quite overcast, and it is really quite dark outside. So it's not a perfect day to shoot without a really fast aperture. But as long as you're picking the right kind of times to shoot, the right conditions, you're going to have an absolute great time with these lenses and these setups. And they are a significantly kind of cheaper way of getting into wildlife photography, testing it out, finding if it's for you. And then if you catch the bug, you know, pun intended, then you might end up going for some of those really quite more expensive lenses. I mean, they are beautiful bits of glass, they are incredible feats of engineering, but these that we've been talking about today, they are a great way of actually getting into wildlife photography. Now, I hope you found that all helpful. If you do have any questions about any of the lenses, any of the wildlife tips, anything at all, pop them down in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think about this kind of stuff as well. There's definitely some really great options for wildlife lenses and kind of lenses that you might use that kind of thing without necessarily going for those kind of £10,000 lenses. There's some really good options. And we tend to get quite a few come through our used department, so definitely worth having a look if that's something you're interested in. Make sure to subscribe for more content. We've got tutorials, we've got interesting stuff all the time. Make sure to give this video a like as well if you enjoyed it, and as always, thanks for watching.